All right, diving into the world of semiconductor processors today, you've given me some really fascinating material on this, and wow, the more I look at this career path, the more I realize how much more there is to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's one of those fields that flies under the radar a bit, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, we all use microchips every day, but how many people actually stop and think about what goes into making them, let alone the people who do it?
Right. So much goes into it.
Exactly. So, before we even get to the career path itself, let's break down what a semiconductor processor does.
Well, the name itself can be a bit of a misnomer, you know? I mean, it's not just about processing. You're talking about manufacturing, repairing, testing. It's really about ensuring the quality and functionality of those tiny little microchips that make our tech-driven world possible.
And doing all of that in those crazy clean rooms you always hear about.
Exactly.
What's the deal with those bunny suits anyway? I mean, are they really necessary?
Oh, absolutely. You have to think even a tiny speck of dust can mess up a microchip. We're talking surgical levels of cleanliness here.
Wow, I had no idea. Makes sense, though, when you think about how small those components are.
It's pretty amazing, right? Such cutting-edge technology being produced in an environment that demands almost, well, archaic levels of cleanliness.
It's a trip. And speaking of advanced technology, one thing that jumped out at me from the research is this idea that the job market for semiconductor processors might be shrinking because of automation,
Yeah.
which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we rely on microchips for basically everything these days.
It's a trend highlighted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it mainly comes down to machines taking over tasks that humans used to do. But I don't think that means we're going to stop needing skilled semiconductor processors entirely.
So it's not that we'll need fewer microchips, just maybe fewer people to make them.
Yeah, exactly. The work might change, become more about managing and overseeing these automated processes, troubleshooting when something goes wrong, that kind of thing. But the need for people who really understand the ins and outs of this technology, I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Makes sense. So automation might shake things up a bit, but it's not like the industry's going to disappear overnight.
Definitely not. If anything, as we become more reliant on this technology, the need for individuals who truly understand these complicated processes, well, that's only going to become more and more important.
Makes you wonder what it takes to actually become a semiconductor processor. What do you need to know? What kind of background are we talking?
Well, this guide we have, Semiconductor Processor, the Complete Career Guide, does a good job of outlining all that. It really comes down to having a solid foundation in STEM.
Okay, so someone who actually enjoyed high school physics would have a head start.
Haha, I guess you could say that. But seriously, a good grasp of electronics, how circuitry works, understanding how different materials behave, at a really tiny level, that's essential. In terms of formal education, some employers might consider you with just a high school diploma if you're willing to go through their training program.
Which I imagine is pretty specialized.
Oh yeah, super specialized. But an associate's or bachelor's degree, especially in something like electrical engineering, microelectronics, even material science, can be a real asset.
It gives you a leg up.
For sure.
So multiple paths, but always that mix of theory and hands-on experience.
Exactly.
Speaking of hands-on, the source material lays out some typical career paths for semiconductor processors. Let's walk through that. What's an entry-level processor doing day to day?
Day to day at that level, it's a lot of learning by doing, a lot of supervision. So think operating manufacturing equipment, doing basic quality control on the semiconductor wafers.
The wafers, right? Those thin slices of silicon.
Yeah, the wafers. And you might help with repairs, troubleshooting minor problems, that kind of thing.
Okay, so very hands-on, but also a lot of structure and support.
Right. But then, as you gain experience and you start showing what you can do, you move up. You become a junior processor. Now you're running things a little more independently, doing those quality control tests on your own, maybe even training newcomers.
More responsibility, less hand-holding.
And that naturally leads to becoming a senior semiconductor processor.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Right. Now you've got years of experience under your belt, you know the tech inside and out, and you really understand the entire manufacturing process. Plus, you're leading teams, coming up with ways to improve those complex processes, mentoring the newer folks.
Wow, so a real veteran of the clean room, someone who's seen it all.
That's the idea. And the more experience you have, especially as automation becomes even more prevalent, the more valuable your skills are. Being able to solve those really complex problems, to think critically, that's what sets you apart.
It's a pretty amazing career path when you lay it all out like that.
Yeah.
But let's back up for a second and talk about the job search itself. What's it actually like trying to land a job as a semiconductor processor?
Well, it's definitely competitive. You're going up against some really sharp people.
I bet. So those interview tips you gave me are probably going to come in handy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You actually included some common interview questions, which is great. Let's dive into those a little bit. What's one question that tends to trip people up, even if they think they're prepared?
Well, one that comes up a lot is describe your experience working with semiconductor processing equipment.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
It does, but they're not just looking for a list of machines you've used. They want to hear that you understand how this equipment actually works. What are some of the challenges you've faced using it? How do you go about troubleshooting problems?
So it's really about showing that you can connect the dots between the technical knowledge and the actual hands-on experience.
Exactly. Another tricky one is, how do you ensure the quality of the semiconductor wafers you're processing? They're looking for more than just a recitation of the steps. They want to see that you're meticulous, that you get how crucial those strict quality control procedures are.
Because one tiny mistake could have huge consequences.
Right. Okay, so you've aced the interview. What else can you do to stand out in a competitive job market like this? Networking. Get out there, go to industry events, join organizations, be active in online forums, make those connections.
Show them you're serious about this.
Yes. And don't just rely on your resume. Think about projects you've worked on maybe in school or even just on your own time that demonstrate those skills.
Something to make that resume really pop.
Exactly. Any contributions to open source projects, anything like that, it all helps. Shows you're passionate and you take initiative.
Those are some great tips. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up our deep dive into the world of semiconductor processors?
It's challenging, no doubt, but it's also incredibly rewarding. If you're the kind of person who loves precision, who's fascinated by technology, this could be an amazing fit.
It's been quite a journey. From those spotless clean rooms to the ever-evolving world of microchips, we've covered a lot of ground today. One last thought for our listeners to chew on. We talked a lot about how these microchips are made, but what about the environmental impact of that process? Something to keep in mind as we move further into this tech-driven future. That's all we have time for today, but we'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, happy learning.